Welcome to Chapter 8, Lesson 3, Functions and Equations. It's also known as Zombieland. We have Eliza and John playing a zombie game down there, and you better watch out because the zombies are trying to interrupt this math lesson. But don't worry, I've got my camo on. I've got my camo pants on, and we are going to get through this in our brains. We're going to keep them safe. We're going to start our video with someone who has something to show you.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I'm a freshman in college right now. I just painted this little tractor. It's a Jubilee. Our grandpa used to have one like this, so that's all.
I will never buy marshmallows again if they come into this video again. Sorry about that. So, for our first problem,
Eliza, stop it.
see, it doesn't just happen at school, it happens here at home too. We're going to be focusing on these vocabulary words, input, output, and linear function in this lesson. Okay? What we have here is a data table, and the input is the x value, and the output is the y value. Remember how we talked about the input is what we start with. Somehow it gets changed to have an output value be different than what we started with. So we have to figure out what happens from the input to the output. How are those numbers changed? Well, to get from 0 to 0, that's pretty much no change, right? How do we go from 1 to 4? Well, we could, from 1 to 4, we could add 3. But remember, this has to be true for every single input to output. From 2 to 8, do we add 3? No. So that is not going to work. So let's try another way. How else can we get from 1 to 4? Go ahead and pause and see if you can figure it out before I write it down. If you said multiply by 4, you're right. Let's make sure that works though for all the other input to output values. From 2 to 8, it still works. Multiply by 4. From 3 to 12, yep, multiply by 4. 4 to 16, same thing, multiply by 4. So now we have to write an equation to represent how we multiply by 4. Well, what are we multiplying by 4? The input. That means actually x. Those values represent x. So we're going to take x and multiply it by 4. Well, remember, we don't use x for the multiply sign anymore. So to show that, if we write this, this means that we're taking x and multiplying it by 4. And what's that going to equal? Our output. What variable represents the output? Y. So we're going to write y there, and so this is our function of how to get from the input to the output. 4x equals y. We could also write it like this. Y equals 4x. This is how it's usually written with y in the front. So we'll go ahead and box that one in. This is how 8th graders write it. This is how 7th graders write it, like that. Okay, here's our next problem. This one includes a graph. Okay. Our function this time is y equals x plus 3. So we're going to add this time. So that means that if we have x values and we have y values, x is our input, what we start with, and y is our output, what we finish with. So let's say that and our x values are going to be along the bottom axis and the y values are going to be along the vertical axis, just like graphing, which you know how to do. Let's say we start with x equals 1 Here's our function, x plus 3. So what is 1 plus 3? 4. So to graph that, we're going to go over x up y, over 1 up 4, and mark a point there. Let's say that x is 2. So in our function, x plus 3, what's the value of the output going to be? So you're going to go over 2 and up 5. Let's say that I'm going to choose x equals 5. I'm going to plug it into my function, so it's going to be 5 plus 3. And what's my output value going to be? 8. So to graph that, we're going to go over x up y, over 5 up 8. Then we're going to graph, what would it be if it was 0, if my input was 0? What's 0 plus 3? Well, it's 3. So when we graph this, we connect the points and we put an arrow at the end because this line will go on forever. Now I know that my points are probably a little bit crooked because it should be a straight line. This is called a linear function because linear is a fancy way of saying a line. And it's a function because whatever value we have of y, it depends on whatever the value of x was. I'm going to put up our next problem so that you can start to read it. We're going to use another graph. And we're going to use another table as well. Okay, so here is our information. Now maybe you didn't realize that however much rainfall there would be in inches, we can relate that to the amount of snowfall that it would be if it was colder outside. So this graph shows the number of inches of rainfall, x, and it's x because it's on the x-axis, equivalent to the inches of snow, y. So snow is up here on the y-axis. We're going to make a function table right here for all the input and output values. So input, we see x, we know that that's going to be the rain, and the output for snow we know is going to be the y. Then we're going to write an equation from the graph that can be used to find total inches of snow equivalent to the total inches of rain. So here's our graph. So basically, for our rainfall, if we have 1 inch of rain, how many inches of snow is that equivalent to? If we go over 1, we go up 10. So that's going to look like this in our table. But what if we go over 2 inches of rainfall? How many inches of snow would that be equal to? 20. Good job being quiet, you two. What if we had 3 inches of rain? How many inches of snowfall would that be? 30. What if we had 4 inches of rain? It would be equal to, you probably figured that out, 40 inches of snow. So now we have to figure out, how did we go from the x to the y? Well, we could have added 9, but if we take 2 plus 9, that doesn't get us to 20. What's another way to get there? Multiply, right? What are we multiplying by? You got it, 10. So now we have to use this in an equation from the graph to relate our x to our y. So what are we multiplying by 10? What variable are we multiplying by 10? Our x variable. So we're going to write that like this. because X represents the ring, and we're multiplying these numbers by 10. And that will equal our output, which is what variable? Our Y. Now, if you remember, it's okay to write this, but the 8th graders would write it like this. Y equals 10X. They'd put the Y in the front. Okay, so now we have looked at how we can take all these words, relate it to a graph, relate it to a table, and relate it to the function. So do your best to do the work, otherwise you never know when a zombie might be trying to be behind you, ready to suck your brains out, okay? And here comes some more. Hurry up, let's stay safe, bye.